Good morning. Can you hear me? The title of this is not a eulogy, but Family Remembrances of Harold Yoder. Of course, when you do something like this, it gets filtered down a little bit, so I'm one of the major filters, so if you have problems, blame me. Harold L. Yoder was born December 20th, 1917 in a farmhouse on Miller Road, southeast of Hubbard. He was the first of 5 children of Lonnie and Vinnie Kaufman Yoder. His siblings were Mildred, Stanley, Dwight, and Junior, and Dwight survives. Except for an early year in Millbury, Indiana, he spent his entire childhood in the Hubbard area. Harold attended Whiskey Hill Elementary School, where his father, Lonnie Yoder, was principal. In fact, Lonnie was principal for many years, and my sisters, Mardell, Anita, and Sheila, recall him being principal there as well. Harold attended Woodburn High School, where he studied agriculture and participated in Future Farmers of America, graduating in 1933 at the age of 15. Because of the severity of the Great Depression, at that time he did not have the opportunity to go to college, so he engaged in various agricultural pursuits, and after several years he was hired by Woodburn Feed and Supply Company, where he eventually worked for 42 years. In his autobiography, in the early 1990s, both my mother and father, Harold and Alma, each wrote an autobiography, and much of this was drawn out of that. In his autobiography, Harold tells of an early adventure that portended many of the travel experiences later in his life. In his early 20s, he had purchased for $55 a 10-year-old Essex 4-door sedan. A year later, he drove it with Lester Gaylor, Kenny Berkey, and a couple of other guys to Flint, Michigan. There he sold it to a junkyard for $15. Then the 5 toured the country in Lester's brand new 1939 Chevrolet, returning home, as he says, somewhat poor but wiser. In 1940, Harold began dating Alma Mardell Nussbaum, who was from Dalton, Ohio. They were eventually engaged after an outing to Central Oregon with Harold's cousin Dorothy Miller and her fiancé Dan Rock. As Harold said later, you know, when you read his autobiography, this stuff is very condensed and there's a lot of stuff left out, so you kind of got to fit it in. Anyhow, because this is all right here together. As Harold said later, the chocolate chip cookies she baked for lunch on that trip made a favorable and lasting impression on me. So I don't know, he ate the cookies and they were engaged. More about chocolate chip cookies later. They were married March 22, 1941 in a double wedding with Dan and Dorothy Roth. His wages by that time were $100 per month and his savings were $0. They were good examples, he said, of young people who were optimistic for the future but did not worry too much about it. Harold was drafted into the Army in 1945, leaving Alma behind with 2 young daughters, Mardell and Anita. He trained as a medical technician in Denver, Colorado, and then in Santa Barbara, California. Then he was sent to South Carolina to prepare for overseas deployment. However, when the war ended, many servicemen with family responsibilities were discharged, and Harold was one of those men, and he returned home to resume his previous work in family life. Daughter Sheila was born 1 year later. If you were to ask me those years, I would completely forget them. Before his first son, Greg, was born in 1952, Harold and Alma bought an 80-acre farm on Needy Road. Early farming endeavors included raising milk and beef cattle, chickens, and sheep. Later on, he began to raise hogs and did so successfully for many years. As was common at that time for small farmers, he also grew grain and corn. Twins Mark and Clark were born in 1954, necessitating the construction of a new and larger farmhouse. Through the years, Harold continued his daytime work with Woodburn Feed and Supply, later called Woodburn Fertilizer and Grain Company. He served in virtually all capacities in the company, including vice president, plant manager, clerk, fertilizer mixer man, and consultant. He was highly respected for his business knowledge and integrity. Evenings and weekends were dedicated to farming, family life, and church life. Many of you know that over the last 2 months, as my father's health failed, I took a leave from work and stayed with him. So one of the things I did for him was prepare a breakfast. And so one morning, and it was only one of three things because he was a man of routine. But anyway, that morning it was eggs. It was either that or pancakes or cold soup. But anyway, so I said, hey, I remember when I was quite young, had a very distinct memory of him eating a large breakfast, which included hot oatmeal, fried eggs, toast, potatoes, fruit, and coffee. And so I said that to him, and he laughed. He said, well, I was hungry. You'd be hungry too if you got up very early, fed and milked cows, fed the hogs, sometimes did field work in spring and fall, all done before breakfast. Then, of course, after breakfast, he headed off to a full day's work at Woodburn Fertilizer, then returned home in the evening to do more chores. And he says he remembers running in the morning from one job to another, and Sheba said she remembered him running as well. I don't know how he did it all, actually. In 1945, Harold and Alma became charter members of Calvary Mennonite Church. They were active in leadership, Sunday school teaching, Bible study, and other church-related ministries. Harold had a deep and abiding faith. If you were to talk at all with him about his faith, however, you would quickly learn that above all else, he was concerned that his daily life be a true reflection of that faith. On the broader community level, Harold served as a local school board member, an insurance representative of Mennonite Mutual Aid, and a board member involved in the planning and development of Hope Village. Primarily because most of Alma's large family had remained in Ohio, Harold and Alma made a few family trips across country. All the children were on their own by the time Harold retired in 1980 from Woodburn Fertilizer. He and Alma began to travel in earnest, starting with the 10,000-mile, 6-week trip in the fall of 1982. After Alma's death, he continued to travel, and even at the age of 85, he traveled to Bolivia to visit Clark and Carolyn and their family, who were serving a term of service with Mennonite Central Committee. To quote from Harold's autobiography again, the people we have met and the sights we've seen on these trips have enriched our lives beyond measure. In his mid-70s, Harold learned to cook. Over several years, when Alma became debilitated with her illness, the family began to refer to her as the armchair cook. In his well-organized, methodical style, Harold took detailed notes as Alma, or Mom, precisely directed his kitchen work. I asked him about this one time, about this quote-unquote cooking school, and he told me that his instructions were detailed and that he learned not to sit down until the meal or baking or cooking project was entirely completed, otherwise he'd have to just get up again. Out of this experience, Harold became a pretty good bread baker and, of course, mastered the baking of chocolate chip cookies. These cookies that my mother baked and that favorably impressed him now became Dad's or Grandpa's cookies, and they were readily available for those of us who knew about them, and more importantly, where to find them. One of the family heirlooms now is Harold's personalized cookbook with his recipes and cookie notes. Harold dedicated himself faithfully to Alma's care through the years of her decline. After she died in 1995, he remained on the farm until the long winter evenings commanded a change in lifestyle. In 2003, he sold the farm to Clark and Carolyn and moved into a garden home at Hope Village in Camden. He soon became involved in Hope Village activities, learning to play pool, participating in social events, and assisting in fundraising projects. In his new home, he hosted and attended a Bible study until 2 months before his death. Harold's grandchildren remember the grandparents taking them to the county fair on Grandchildren's Day. This annual activity then gradually morphed into activities on the farm for a Grandchild's Day. Grandpa took the children on tractor rides while Grandma majored in child-friendly food. In living out their life values, Harold and Alma created rich memories in a family whose members not only cared for each other, but who truly enjoy each other. As family, children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, we discussed what words or phrases came to mind as we thought of Harold. These descriptions included gracious, kind, level-headed, person of great integrity, thoughtful, someone who did not speak ill of others, someone interested in the world, a great lover of crossword puzzles, a voracious reader, and someone who really continued to grow till the very end of his life. The last 2 months of Harold's life, he very much wished to die. He did not wish this as someone who wished to escape this world or to get away from family or friends. Perhaps me. But rather as someone who lived out his life in the fullness of time. And now was the time to leave this earthly world and join with those who had gone before him. 2 weeks ago, his brother Dwight came for a morning visit and asked him how he had slept, and he replied, "I slept fine. The problem is I woke up." This, of course, led to a discussion between them about who would be the surviving heir of the family. Now, I was in the kitchen sort of listening to this. As I recall that conversation, neither one wished to be the surviving heir. As I thought about that after, I thought, is that going to be Clark and I in 30 or 40 years? 1 week ago, his granddaughter Kristen, who was visiting him in her capacity as a hospice nurse, she said, "Grandpa, if you get any lighter," he'd lost a lot of weight. She said, "Grandpa, if you get any lighter, you're going to fly away." And he immediately said, "Well, that's what I'm trying to do." Harold Yoder, husband, father, grandfather, great-grandfather, brother, good friend, thank you for your life. You lived well surrounded by family. You died well surrounded by family. Rest in peace. Amen.